part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey guys, it's Don Mike, your host for Producing While Asian, and welcome to today's episode in a conversation with Cathy Oh. Cathy is not just a good friend of mine, but she also is a actor, singer, dancer, director, choreographer, and also animal activist. So we're here today to chat with her about all of those things, and I hope you enjoy what we have to talk about today. So welcome to Producing While Asian. Hi, Cathy, and welcome to Producing While Asian. It's so good to have you and to see you after years. It's really great to have you on.
Hi, Don Mike. I'm a big fan of yours. I am so flattered that you asked me to be a part of this podcast.
Of course. I mean, we go way back. I mean, like 42nd Street, good times. That was 10 years ago. Can you believe that?
It was about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. I was talking about it with Aaron Ryan, and for audience members, Aaron Ryan played Peggy Sawyer in our production of 42nd Street, and we remember the time that we met during that production. It was that she was like the lead and then didn't have a script, and I was like, here's my script, and that's how our friendship started. But yeah, and that was a fun time, and so here we are. One decade later, and so much has happened. And so I'm bringing you on here because you have done so much in both professional theater and community theater and dance and just in your community and with animals, which is really awesome, which definitely talk about that. There's your kitty in the background.
My cat.
Or their dog. Yeah, cat. Sorry, I can't
That was
tell
my
you.
cat, yeah.
Let's just give the audience, give them a little background of kind of who you are and how you landed in the entertainment biz, but also just, in DC and all that.
Yeah. So when I graduated from college, I was a art history major and a dance minor / major. I don't think they really had that option in college as a degree. And I had done musical theater in elementary school, middle school, high school, college. So it was something that was really important to me and something that I found I was passionate about. When I graduated from college, the DC area is home for me. And I auditioned and got into a local professional dance company. And so I would say that my strengths in dancing is definitely modern dance. And I have a huge passion for modern dance. And this company was around for quite some time. And like some companies do, they just kind of dissolved for whatever reason. We all went on and did different projects. Some of us still work together. Some of us haven't spoken since, which is, not personal or anything like that. But when that company dissolved, I needed something to fill my creative void. So on a whim, and this is pre-social media, I don't know if you remember this, but I think Friday, the Washington Post would have this insert called Guide to the Lively Arts. And they would so they're like basically classifieds for auditions. And there was an audition for a community theater show. And on a whim, I said, well, let me just try it. So I kind of dug up an old song. I'm not a singer. I dug up an old song I sort of knew, and I fudged my way through it. And I became one of the featured dancers in that community theater production, and I was hooked. And nice. From there, I had done a couple other shows, and then I wanted to see what would happen on the production side. So I wanted to try out to be the choreographer and then to be an assistant stage manager. I've not reached out to do any production or actually producer type work because that seems extremely overwhelming to me. And hats off to any producers professionally, regionally, community theater wise, because that's a pretty big job. So that's kind of like where I got my foothold in the arts in this community. And since then, I've just kind of alternated between performing and doing choreography. And I would do that for professional theaters, for community theaters. I do have a love for community theater because I want everybody to experience what it's like to be in a production. And I think just having that accessibility for the everyday person who just wants to experience it is just that I'm passionate about.
Totally. And
my dog's barking in the background.
your dog agrees. And and you went to college at, where did you go to college? I feel like I know this answer.
Yeah, I went to Dickinson College in Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, and I feel like one part of our industry that we have it, but I feel like it deserves more attention is like the dance community. Like you're always talking about like actors and musical theater and plays and all of that. But with dance, it's very niche. And so, I definitely want to pull that out in these conversations too and talk about what's happening in that community as well. Because there are a lot of AAPI people in dance, and you don't hear about them nearly enough. And I agree with what you're saying about community theater. It's like it's just that chance for people to just be part of it. And it's, yes, there's the typical, like in any theater situation there's drama, but it's a community theater allows access. I think that's my point. It's and you can find equity in that way too. But with producing, like what you said, it can be a big job, but I feel like everybody at some level is a producer, right? In some way, shape, or form. And so it kind of, that seamlessly leads to my next question for you, which is always an interesting answer from my guests, because this is what I ask everybody. And so it's on a scale of 1 to producer. Where do you find yourself, and why or why not? And, we've had people say, a range of numbers, like absolutely like a number 1, or like a definitely producer, or like right in the middle. And so how do you feel about that? Because really you can't define what a producer is, because a producer means so many different things. Like there's no university for becoming a producer. There's no major. There are workshops and things, but there's no like degree in production. So where do you find yourself on that scale?
I'm going to say maybe 7.58. Does that make sense? I mean, I think you're right. I think there has to be some level of just acquired knowledge based off of like the experiences that you gather in being a producer. I think being a performer, I think being a choreographer, an assistant stage manager, a techie, backstage tech person who moves set pieces around. I think all that experience just kind of accumulates into like one could accumulate into being able to produce something. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because I feel like, like 7.58, it's like you're doing all the functions of being a producer. You're just not saying that, you don't lead with that, if that makes sense. And at some point producing, it literally, it's just organizing. Like, that's really what producing is. And people are like mystified by these names that are defined as producers, and they're behind things like Les Mis and Wicked and all of that. But really, when you really break it down, like the producer is the person that just keeps everything organized. And what I say, and feel free to agree or not, but in my experience, being a producer is being a professional at getting yelled at. And like, while it sounds dramatic, it's kind of true. You get the good yelling at, which is like, oh my God, I love you, you're great. But you also get the bad yelling at that's like, interpersonal things or HR type things, because their theater doesn't really have an HR. So as a producer, you are. And so I kind of compared the producer to the den mom or sorority mother who has to just hear all the problems, feel them, and help solve them, and has to care, essentially. Like and I think everybody has that degree. You kind of take on the caring for others. But
I think what's interesting is this current job and past jobs that I've been a part of, watching from the outside looking into how events are run. And I can see where someone looks at a big, huge event from an event perspective, and I'm looking at the event as a production perspective, which I think can be a little bit different. And sometimes it's, sometimes I learn a lot from the event planners of how they do things. And sometimes they can learn from me on how a production should be, or, what things like stage right and stage left is something that someone who is part of the theater world wouldn't know.
And so how would you, I guess, coming from the performer point of view, give us a little bit of like, in your kind of journey through the arts, what are you, and also now that we're kind of in this weird place in terms of the pandemic of like theaters kind of coming back, even when theater died for 14 months in a weird way, what are you looking now as we're coming back and with things like Broadway opening up again in September and people starting to do productions again, as somebody who's in the performing space and the choreography space, what are you hoping to see more of and less of in the quote unquote new day of theater, from producers, because you work with them. So, what are you hoping that people lean towards or stray away from now that we're kind of getting this restart?
I like that you called it a restart. And I think my answer isn't necessarily a result of the pandemic, but more a result of the social injustice matters that we've been dealing with. And what I would like to see is for producers and directors and casting agents to put their money where their mouth is and say, I hear all the time, I'm going to have a diverse cast. This is going to be the most diverse cast ever. And then, suddenly the diversity.
In Greece.
Yeah, they have like there's a need for a token Black person. I want them to see past that. And I'm hoping that we see, like you said, a Black Sandy in Greece or an Asian Sandy in Greece. I mean, I get that there are stories, musical stories that have that racial perspective to it, and that's important to maintain. So not sure anyone other than a Black American could play Cole House, but there are, I don't know that Sandy needs to be blonde hair, blue eyed. I think your friend, and I don't know her, but I've seen her perform. Was it Diane Huey who was the Little Mermaid?
Yeah. Yes.
I remember watching like the controversy around her casting because she was Asian, and the Little Mermaid can't be Asian. And I'm like, well, first of all, mermaids aren't necessarily. Yeah, exactly. Why?
Why?
Here is a talented, beautiful woman who was probably perfect as Ariel. So it's just like things like that. I want people who are, as a result of Black Lives Matter, as a result of End Asian Hate, who are now confronted with expanding their casting, I guess, to actually do it. To not just say, I'm going to have a multi-diverse cast. Do it. Prove it. Show me.
Right. Yeah. And one thing that's always... No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, if you are going to have a multi-diverse cast, you need to have the diversity of the production team needs to be apparent also. Like, just do it. And that's what I hope comes from this 14-month hiatus from theater.
Yeah, it's almost like if you're going to talk about multiculturalism or talk about diversity and equity in the arts, then like go full on, like full out, no marking, like the whole team, like creative and cast, don't half-ass it, cool. Like you can't just, I think we're past the time of people saying like, oh, well, there's one Asian person in the ensemble, so it's diverse, right? Like we're definitely past that. And with Diana's controversy, it was like, I believe the quote from a woman was, a white woman, of course, was they need to keep Ariel classic, quote unquote. And people were like, well, what does that mean? Like, what is a classic mermaid? Like mermaids don't have a race. Like they're literal fish people. Like, I don't know what your point is. So yeah, that was awesome to see her do that. And then like, I think around the same time was when there was a controversy with, I think it was like a tribute to Jerome Robbins that I will not call out the theater right now because I'm sure they were traumatized enough, but a theater in I think Missouri, where they put a white woman in an Asian woman's role, and essentially was yellowface, and people were kind of like, wait, why? So
hey, I'm Jason.
And I'm Gary, and we love ball cards.
And if you love ball cards too, good news. You just found your new favorite podcast. From breaks to grading.
And from collecting to flipping, join us on the Ball Card Show.
The sports podcast for the sports collector.
Hi, I'm Cathy Oh, and you are listening to the podcast Producing While Asian.
a friend who of mine posted something about revivals of shows, and I wanted to know if you agree and get your thoughts on this. And he said something like, we understand that there are shows that keep coming back as revivals, but if we're going to revive a show but not be willing to revise it, then we shouldn't revive the show at all. If it's a show from the past, like a show that might have serious racial undertones that can be corrected. So, and things like, for example, off the top of my head, like South Pacific, things, and speaking specifically to Asian characters in shows, South Pacific, King and I, like shows that are classics, there is room to revise them, but so his point was, if we can't feel like we can revise these kind of classic shows to make them a little more modern, we shouldn't revive the show, because there's a reason why we shouldn't do that show anymore. So what are your thoughts on that statement?
I am definitely supportive of revising shows, making them modern. I think that we need to be careful about not revising it so much that it actually changes the meaning of the show.
Right.
South Pacific, I mean, part of the message was just that there's this racism towards children and not being able to blend a family, whatever you took away from it. And I think those are still very important messages. Mm-hmm. Maybe they should be called period pieces now, and not be changed. I think that revisions to make things a little bit more modern are always good. But again, I think you just don't want to destroy the actual story. Like, there is a story,
right? Yeah,
the underlying themes of racism, and you don't want to take that away by changing it too much.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel like revise to a point. I think there were definitely some, like in the before times, there were definitely some like solid tries at like slightly revising or modernizing a show, or even like completely change the concept of what you see, but keeping the integrity of the story the same. So I do think it's a longer conversation, and I think especially with pieces that are so well known and are common to people's knowledge of theater, it's a very specific process, right? Because exactly what you said, you don't want to ruin what the actual original story was, but then there's also the line between stories that can still be told, like South Pacific, because there are those specific lessons, and stories that don't necessarily need to be told anymore, like that are there. We can appreciate them for what they were, but like the Mikado, for example, we don't need a show about white people making fun of being Japanese people. I think we're done with that phase of entertainment. So, well, yeah. I think
there are two words that you mentioned that really struck a chord with me, and you said longer conversation. And I think that's something that's very important, because this is not something that's going to be changed overnight. This is a long, continuous, always improving process. And it's and I think everybody just has to be patient, including the BIPOCs. We have to be patient. This change is happening. Change will come for us. But we have to stay focused and stay in the fight and just be patient. I think more people than not want the change to happen. Non-minority want the change to happen. And I think we just need to make sure that we just stay focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can seem daunting, right? Especially like when something great happens and then everyone's really excited and there's all this momentum, and then like people are expecting that instant gratification of a next step, and then it doesn't happen right away. And so I agree with you. Patience is such a key word in all of this, in any part of what's trying to change in our industry, because you can't just like scrub the whole board and be like, all right, well, we're going to start at zero. Like, people have to write shows, like people have to go through the producing process and put it in front of the right people. Because somebody said something interesting once where it's like, well, yes, we want to bring out those stories about BIPOC, LGBTQ plus people, like out in the open. We still to some degree depend on the old guard to open the door, like to be open to it and to say, okay, like we're going to give you this chance. And not that it's only up to them, it does require us to push on the door, but at the same time, we have to I don't want to say like play fair because that's really not the right phrase, but like we have to play the game in a weird sense to get us out there, because you
I,
kind of have to go through to the traditional channels. Am I making sense?
yeah, you're totally making
Yeah.
sense. I think it's about accountability. And it goes back to
Yeah.
what I would want to be changed coming out of this pandemic, coming out of, I don't know if we'll ever be fully free of social injustice, but going back to holding people accountable, put your money where your mouth is. I get that rewriting a show, inserting different ethnic characters or whatever may take a long time, but just do it. And I will hold you accountable. If you're telling me that you are going to, half of your season is going to be directed by people of color, I will hold you accountable to that. And I think other BIPOCs need to hold theaters and dance companies and arts organizations accountable for that multiracial, multilingual, however you want to phrase it, their boards, board of directors, their production team, their casting, the people who are working behind the scenes, then we need to make sure that that happens. And so I don't know if it's more about playing the game as it is holding people accountable.
Definitely. And what are your thoughts on holding, not just holding people accountable who are in power already, but also holding each other accountable in terms of the actual like community of people of color and LGBT plus, because I feel like sometimes, and this is my own opinion, is that we get into a space of, cool, I hired this Korean choreographer, so she's going to be awesome regardless, and like she can do whatever she wants. And then like that person will make choices that aren't necessarily in line with what we're trying to be, what we're trying to progress. And, then it's an issue. So I in terms of keeping each other accountable in the movement, what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like there needs to be to some degree that too, because we can't just say, oh, it's almost like a weird form of like generalization and tokenization in a way where I'm like, okay, we've got this Filipino producer, he can do whatever, go, just for the sake of saying we have a Filipino producer,
Mm-hmm. I think it's all about having transparency and ongoing open conversations. I think that's the only way that you can get people on board with you. I think it's the only way that you can get the support, that BIPOCs get the support that they need to be a producer, or just that ongoing open transparency that we're all craving for, that we all desperately need right at the time.
Definitely. One other guest on the second episode of the season, Corey Giacchino, she went into, unintentionally, just because it came up in our conversation, the idea of cancel culture. And I know that that's very, very much a hot topic right now. And so where does the limit land on cancel culture? So how do you feel about cancel culture and like how that affects these conversations that we need to have? Because what I said was, it's case by case, right? Like you can't cancel everything, because if you cancel everything, then you're left with nothing. So, where do you stand on the cancel culture spectrum in terms of, of course, eliminating things that are actually toxic versus an unpopular opinion that can be discussed?
Right. I think, yes, cancel culture is a real thing that everyone is dealing with. And I think that, similar to you, it should be considered on a case by case basis or genre basis, because there still are messages that we can, and stories in these musicals and in these plays that we learn from. And like you said, if we cancel everything, where are we going to be? It's kind of like ignoring history almost. There is that fine line between what is accurate and needs to be told going forward and what is just obnoxious and a cheap laugh and just hurtful. Like that is stuff that can be left out. But anything else, I think it's important because it is part of our story as people, as Americans, as BIPOCs, need to be told, and it needs to be at the forefront.
In your experience, have you ever found any situations where, I mean, obviously there's a lot that still needs to happen, but so far, have you ever been in a situation where you looked around and you're like, wow, this is truly what theater could be or is, because it's happening, but like, in that singular experience for you, when you looked around at either a dance project you were a part of, or a theatrical show you were in, or on the creative floor, where you were like, this is great, like I love what's happening in this space, and this is, we should do more of this. Talk to us a little bit about an experience where you've encountered that. I know it's a big question. There's a lot to choose from, probably. Or not.
Yeah, I don't know if I can pinpoint one that actually made me feel that way, because there have been a lot of situations. I'm sure you have been in the situation where you walk into a room and you're like, I'm the only Asian here.
Yes.
I'm the only minority here. And that is, it can be lonely. It can be also very amusing. So I definitely have been a part of productions and organizations where I've looked around and I have, almost like, there was another Asian woman that was dancing with me, as well as a Black man that was dancing with me, as well as LGBTQ trans people who were dancing with me. So it was a huge, God, this is such a cheesy word, but a huge rainbow of people that were part of this, and that was great. And that was with the dance company. And I think what even made it so much more interesting and enjoyable was that, it being a dance company, there were also so many different shapes and sizes, part of this dance production. So that was also very refreshing. In the theater world, I'd have to think a little bit more on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when you actually are confronted with like reflecting back on where you've been, I've had the same thing. It's very hard to look back and be like, yeah, that truly was what I think we should be, where we should be at. And that just says a lot about the work that still needs to be done. Like I've had moments, like small moments, where I'm like, that's awesome. Like working with this person on the team has been really helpful, or, the choice of this season has been really great, in terms of moving things forward a little bit and not being so antiquated. But, in terms of like sitting in a room and being like, yeah, I'm looking around and this is what we're doing, and it's very rare. And honestly, let me know if you agree or disagree with this, but I feel that the equity and diversity piece and inclusion happens a lot more in the dance community. Like I want to say that I've seen lots of productions of dance pieces that have had that rainbow of people that you were talking about, as opposed to seeing a show. Obviously theater calls for specific roles, but it's like I see it more naturally happen in dance. And how do you feel about that? I feel like I'm pretty accurate with that statement.
I would agree with that statement 100%.
And even with gender too, like it's just a diverse group.
Yeah. I don't know if there's so much that's packed into producing while Asian and being BIPOC. Is it again, the lack of accessibility growing up to theater, because theater can be kind of expensive, to dance classes, because those can be kind of expensive. What is preventing
the diversity from happening?
BIPOCs from moving forward in like whatever art that they're passionate about.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the conversation about representation. It's, I feel like in any place, if you see yourself or somebody that looks like you, it kind of signals a thing where you're like, yeah, okay, great. Like they did it, so can I. And I feel like in entertainment and media, it's why this podcast exists, is I'm hoping that we reach like a generation of AAPI people that have never heard a show specifically about AAPI people doing what they might be dreaming of doing. And, for someone to listen to this and say, wow, there's a Cathy Oh in the world. Like, I would like to be like her. And now I know her story. Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's that kind of knowing that there is somebody that's done that. Because I feel like when you're growing up too with parents, like sometimes parents can be like, well, I don't see any other Filipino people doing this, so why are you going to do this? And so that probably contributes to that accessibility
Oh
barrier.
yeah, absolutely. Especially if your parents were born in the Philippines, or like my parents were born in Korea. So there's definitely
Mhm.
that cultural issue between
Yeah.
US and Korean, like how they perceive things. And one of I have an early memory of me and my mom, and I'm dating myself, watching the show MASH, the show, I can't remember his name now. Anyways, you know
It's
who
Alan Alda, right?
Yes, Alan Alda,
Yeah.
and a bunch of other people. And there was a woman on there who was Korean, and she played a Korean nurse. And she wasn't a huge character. She wasn't even a huge side character, but every now and then she would be on the show working as a nurse, and she would say things in Korean. And it was something that my mom and I always got excited about.
Yeah.
There's someone
Of course.
that looks like us on national
Mhm.
television on a highly critically acclaimed show. And that was always so great, but also so sad because I can't think of anyone else growing up
Right.
that I could relate to. And now we have people like Sandra Oh and Lucy Liu and Stephen Yun and just Daniel Day Kim, and just like those people who are Korean and Asian, and on the cover of celebrity magazines, and just really making it big in the art world. And I think that is something that I never had growing up.
Yeah.
And
It continued for a while too. It really hasn't been until maybe the last 10 years that you're really seeing AAPI people in arts, in entertainment, in media. For me growing up, it was Paulo Montalban, who was the prince on the Whitney Houston Cinderella. And, I was super lucky to work with him and like say that to his face. But he was for little boys like me, they didn't have to be Filipino, but it was like, look, there's this Asian guy who's playing Prince Charming. When you normally see Prince Charming as like a blonde white guy or like a brown hair white guy, to know that was a thing was really cool. And so, but again, like that's one that I can remember. I think the only other Asian person that was in my like universe as a child was the yellow Power Ranger. And being a little boy, you don't really want to be the yellow Power Ranger, but it's like those are the two Asian people that stick out to me in entertainment for kids when I was growing up. And so it's really cool to see that emergence of just many AAPI people in entertainment for kids to see. I think the coolest story I saw, it was on the Today Show, and like shout out to Lin-Manuel for casting Philippa Sue in Hamilton. And there's that story of the little Chinese girl who saw Philippa Sue and said out loud, "Look, it's me."
It's me, yeah.
And so cute, and it's so important. And I think we have plenty of work to do to keep making that happen. So
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
So now,
Can
what have you been?
Can I tell you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, can I tell you one of my favorite community theater stories?
Yeah, of course.
This doesn't really have anything to do with race or being Asian, but it was just kind of like the heart of community theater, in my opinion. I had a friend come to see one of my shows, and I was really stressed out about not him coming to see it, but just about there were things that are happening, like production things, just things, always happen in a show. And I was really down about it. And I saw him at intermission. And the first thing he said to me is, "I can't wait for intermission to be over. I want to know what happens to these people." And at that time, I was like, this is a reason why I do this. You are the exact reason why I love doing community theater, because he was so excited about the second act and what was going to happen. And he didn't,
awesome.
The mics weren't working or the fly got stuck or whatever. He just was like, "I want to know what happens."
Yeah, like just somebody who's like truly a fan of what they're watching, which is so nice. It's so nice to find people like that, because it's just like a like an unbiased opinion, right? I feel like when you like in any industry, if you study the actual industry, it kind of ruins it for you a little bit, because you go and see a show and you're like, you see the show and you're in your head about like aspects of things, for me, I know when I go see a show sometimes, like if I'm slightly not happy with what I'm seeing. I'm just like, I whip out the program, like, who produced this? And, but most people are not, and that's great. And I feel like those are the people we want to reach in terms of not necessarily influencing them, but like showing them, what theater is and what the entertainment world is, and especially with people, in the industry, AAPI people, like, in making them believe that we're here too, like, we can do this as well. And so
Yes.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. We read one book a month and then we talk about it. Books like Stephen King's The Shining or Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. If you're on the hunt for book recommendations and enjoy sparkling conversation, come read along with us and then listen in.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hi, I'm Cathy Oh, and you are listening to the podcast Producing While Asian.
now, artistically speaking, for you, in the pandemic, what have you been up to? What have you been able to do in this time, to kind of itch that creative bug? Because I know everybody's been different, in this last year and a half, so
Yeah.
What have you been doing?
Well, to help with the creativity piece of it, there are two women from a dance company that I used to work with. We would get on Zoom calls every couple weeks and just create movement. And it's usually confined to our living room rug or whatever, but it felt so good to move with people and just connect whatever movement was that we were working on. So we would just someone would pick a random song and we would each take a phrase of that song, come up with a phrase of movement, and then the next person would, and then the three of us just came up with a dance, and never to be shown to anybody, never to be seen by any person that's in the public, but it was just for us. And it really helped with just moving feels so good when you're stuck at home, and then just being able to have that creative outlet was super helpful and just mentally just so stimulating. So that's one of the things that I've done from the creative piece of, while I'm stuck at home.
Yeah.
The other
That's
is
awesome.
eating ice cream, but
Oh yeah, of course. I've heard a lot of self-care has been a lot of things that people have been doing, or one big thing that people have been doing in the pandemic, because I feel like there's value in that too. I was going to say,
Absolutely.
if it was just that, I'd be like, great. That's so important too, especially with kind of the collective trauma that we're seeing, and the dual layered collective trauma that our community is seeing in the past few months. Well, the last year actually, but intensified in the last few months. Hopefully we can see you choreograph an actual in-person thing soon. Fingers crossed that all comes back. And so you also work with animals. I'm going to bring that up because, I'm sure everybody listening on this podcast loves our furry friends. And I know animals have been a big help to people, and vice versa, like in the pandemic, because people at home were like, well, I don't have anything to do. I'm home all day. Let me adopt, a cat or a dog or another animal. So talk to us a little bit about your work in that realm. I know it's not arts, but that's important too, because we definitely want to let people know, that there's still friends out there that need to be adopted, even though, the pandemic is coming to a close, I would say.
Yeah, so I am the Vice President of Human Resources for the Humane Rescue Alliance, which is the DC Animal Shelter, and it's an amazing job, and I have amazing coworkers, and I get to see animals almost every single day that I go into the shelter. And animals are a great way of self-care. They're a lot of work, I'm not going to lie.
They are.
It's a huge responsibility. Yeah, you're new to having a dog. Your dog for about a year?
I had him, I adopted him, right? Barry, for everybody that's listening. Barry, it's short for Barack. His name is Barack. I know.
The presidential puppy.
The presidential puppy on Instagram. And he, I adopted him in August of 2019. So shortly after I moved to Pittsburgh, and that was a alarm from the police. But so I had him for about six months before the pandemic started, and so I was very thankful to already have had him with me, and so he was kind of already used to me. But I do have friends that adopted animals at the beginning of the pandemic, and it really helped them. I kept them on a schedule, and they were excited to care about a living thing. And and of course animals are great. They're just unconditionally loving you all the time.
Yes.
Who doesn't want that? And
one of the things I do, like aside from my main job, is that I do foster a lot of animals through the Humane Rescue Alliance. And I think for anyone that is on the fence about whether or not to adopt an animal, think about fostering, because fostering does save lives, and you're giving an animal a chance to survive, to understand and know love, and a warm home and food. And fostering, I think, has taught me, especially this past year, has taught me a lot about being patient, has taught me to slow down a little bit and to care about this living thing that I have, and to just like focus on that. And not, it is the most rewarding experience that I've ever really been a part of. So yes, come and visit, go on our website, see what animals we have available, and take one home.
So my other question for you is, what arts organizations have you been really involved with lately? And kind of who would you like to kind of shout out and put out there and get in front of our audience here? Doesn't have to be AAPI specific, but places that you think have really weathered the pandemic well, and then who need our support in the after times, I will call it, when we come back from this break. What I've said to the last guest on the show was, you see the organizations that are surviving the pandemic, and while it is hard, it's a majority the organizations that are leading with heart, leading with love, so to speak, and are giving back to the community in a way that they have never really done before, or caring about social causes genuinely rather than performatively. So in your experience so far, tell us about a few organizations that you really care about, and who you'd love to see be supported in the next few.
So I this is more of a shout out to dance studios than to actual theater companies.
And that's great.
Yeah, everyone's kind of feeling the brunt and the hardships of the pandemic. And I feel that those organizations like Dance Place in DC, who offer virtual classes, I think that their curriculum is extremely culturally diverse. I am rooting for them. I've always rooted for them. I think they also give opportunities to people who don't have the funds to take classes regularly. And I think that is something to be admired, because I think dance is for everyone, and everyone should have that opportunity to enjoy it, or maybe learn that they don't like it, or learn that they love it. Yeah. So that's one organization that I'm right now, I'm still a little shy about being inside, but as soon as I can get into a dance studio, if that happened today, I would go today. So I'm itching to get back into a dance studio. That's definitely one of the dance studios that I would do a shout out to for sure.
Awesome. And I've seen stuff at Dance Place in DC, and it's been wonderful. And so, definitely support them. What is their website, just for reference for everybody listening?
I think it's just dance-place.org or danceplace.org. It's in Northeast DC, and it's, I believe, the executive or artistic director is Christopher K. Morgan. Love him, love his classes. I know that they're very big in African dance. They're very big in hip hop, modern, obviously, which is what appeals to me. I mean, they've got it all.
Cool. And so my second to last question is for the future of the community that's listening. I don't ask for one because that's too specific, but if you had a basket of advice, so to speak, give us your main highlights of what you would confer upon somebody who's trying to explore the arts industry, whether that be in dance or, going into producing or creative or even just auditioning. What have you learned as a BIPOC woman in this industry that you'd like to pass on? And it can be something that, you never knew before, or something you did know that you just wish someone told you.
I think this is more apparent now. This is something they didn't really know before or actually exercise it. But I think for those people who are auditioning for shows, I would say go for the parts and roles that are traditionally Caucasian, because like we were talking about before, who knows what a mermaid
Who cares?
is, right? Who cares? Who cares? I mean, I think unless the story itself isn't based in race relations, go for it. Be an Asian Adelaide. Be great at it. Love it, and I hope more people of color just kind of go for it. And so my advice to them would be not to settle. I mean, if that is a role that you want, that is a role that you were born to play, then you should definitely put that down as a role that you want.
Awesome. And then last, where can people find you? Like if somebody out there is like, I want her to choreograph my show, or like want to reach out to you just to reach out to you, what's the best place that they could do that at?
Well, I am one of those people that don't have a website, so you can reach out to me via Facebook or Instagram, or just email me, or reach out via you. You can be my next producer.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link it on our blog for people to see as well too, so that they can reach you. But I do want to thank you for being on this podcast today and for sharing your story. It's so important to hear from people like you who, have seen a lot and do a lot, and, know amazing folks, including yourself included, to get the word out there that, you can do it too in that sense. And, but yeah, it was really great to have you. It's been way too long. We have to do this.
It has been. Yes.
And so please come back anytime.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. I'm so proud of you. And I'm so proud of you initiating some of the change that needs to happen and staying on top of that. I mean, like I said, we're all in it for the long haul. So we're here. We're doing it.
We are. Well, thank you. And we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We are produced by Press Play Podcasts, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a review and a rating, and be sure to send us any topic ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, and read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com. We hope you join us again soon.